Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada, on this Wednesday morning, May the 7th, 18th, May the 18th, in the year of our Lord 2022. I'm Hugh Hewitt, Inside the Beltway Live. Elections across the United States last night. We have a dead heat in Pennsylvania. You know, I was backing Dave McCormick. Kathy Barnett flamed out. She did a very respectable 25% or something like that. But Jeff Rowe tells us that Dave McCormick will win. Now, Jeff Rowe is probably America's best political consultant because Rowe no longer does it. And he says, based on how many uncounted absentee ballots on Twitter, he tells us this on Twitter, based on how many uncounted absentee ballots there are and the margin by which Dave has won them so far, we are confident of victory. Dave will win this race. There's 1,372,000 votes cast, about 50 to 60,000 votes left. Dr. Oz is ahead by 2,600, but the margin in the absentee and mail-in cuts pretty decisively towards McCormick. We don't know. I don't know. You don't know. We'll know sometime today. The Barnett and Bartos and Sands votes, I don't know how they would have cut if they were not in the race, but it looks to me like Dr. Oz with Donald Trump's endorsement is hanging on by his fingernails, but I think McCormick, if I had to bet this morning, I'd bet McCormick wins that. We'll know by tomorrow, I hope. Madison Cawthorn's 2-year run in Congress is over. He was beaten in a primary last night. Lots of other news across the United States in races that are not as important to you. I think I'm going to come down where I was before. The Trump factor is worth about 10%. Gets you about 10% in a Republican primary and in a general election. It also loses you about 10%. But that 10% can go in a lot of different directions. So, don't know in Pennsylvania. Focused a lot on it. We'll tell you about it if we get details. I tweeted at Jeff, more information is better for a newscast than less information. I'd like to know how many are exactly out and whether they are absentee military or in-person spoiled votes. I saw a story from Lancaster County yesterday that the new ballot provider had screwed up 900 votes. This will end up in the next Dinesh D'Souza movie. His movie 2,000 Mules was about screw-ups in Georgia during the recount. And so every election, I wrote the book on elections. If it's not close, they can't cheat. Every election has a screw-up at some level. It only matters in close ones. If a race is not within 1,000 votes, you can't flip it. You can't flip it. But that's after they are all counted. And with 50 to 60,000 votes still outstanding in Pennsylvania, it's just too early to tell, although Dr. Ez has a 2,600 vote lead at this moment. To international news, Putin takes Mariupol. The battle for Mariupol is over. But wider Donbass victory slipping from his reach. This is from Reuters. Even as the Kremlin prepares to take full control of the ruins of Mariupol city and faces a growing prospect of defeat in its bid to conquer all of Ukraine's eastern Donbass because its badly mauled forces lack the manpower for significant advances, Western weaponry bolsters Ukraine's combat power, analyst says. Russia's forces are unlikely to be vanquished quickly, even if there's no major new troop deployment materializing, setting the stage for the 4-week battle of the Donbass to be just grind on. Quote, I think it's either going to be a defeat with the current force posture for Russia or mobilize the whole country. I don't think there's any middle ground, according to a Russian consulting firm. We shall see. U.S. refuelers are taking part in a large-scale Israeli drill for the first time. It simulates a strike on Iran's nuclear facilities as part of the broader Chariots of Fire exercise that Israel is undertaking later this month. I'm glad of that. I also don't believe for a moment that Joe Biden would ever help Israel hit Iran. But the reports out of Vienna, the reports out of the International Atomic Energy Agency is that Iran is going for a weapon. They're going for a weapon, and I just think the current Israeli government is too weak to do anything about it. And they're posturing, and I think the American government is posturing. Inflation fears grow as millions choose not to work. This is from Great Britain, where the inflation rate reached 9% yesterday, year over year. It's only 8.3% in the United States year over year, 11% at the wholesale level. Inflation fears are growing. 7.1 million people in Great Britain can work but don't want to work. That's the COVID hangover. On the good news side, U.S. retail sales grew 0.9% in April. Retail spending for the fourth straight month as inflation remained high. That's spending at stores, online, and in restaurants. That's very good for the economy. We've got to get people out of their houses and buying again. Biden administration is easing restrictions on Venezuelan oil. Apparently we can buy oil from dictators now because Joe Biden's worried about the fall elections. That doesn't make any sense. New York City coronavirus cases reach a record high alert level. That's not a record. I'm sorry, I misstated. They just reach a high alert level. They've been there before. They've got 3,500 new cases a day. Now, I'm not surprised by this. I don't think anyone is surprised by this. COVID's up around the country. I myself have got both vaccines and both boosters. I don't worry about it. The only time I put on a mask is when I'm in an Uber or an airplane, and airplanes are apparently free. The fetching Mrs. Hewitt flew last week, and you don't have to wear a mask anymore. And she said about half of the people on the airplane wear it, and half don't. And I'm the part that don't, because I go out in public, I go to restaurants, I go to movies, and if I'm going to get it, but I've got the vaccines and the boosters, I'm not going to get very sick. With plunging enrollment, a seismic hit to public schools. I'm going to expand on this New York Times story when I come back. Maybe the best thing to come out of COVID is that people are fleeing public schools because they got to look at what goes on inside of public schools, the curriculum, the teachers, the ideology, the wokeness, and they said, I'm going to find a private school or a Catholic school that will take my kids, and that's what you ought to be doing if you possibly can, unless you've got the great public school out there that tells its teachers, don't bring your politics, don't bring your sexuality, don't bring your ideology, left, right, or center, up, down, left or right, male, female, or somewhere in between. Don't bring it into the classroom. Teach them how to read, write, and do arithmetic, and we'll be fine. Those kind of schools are good. Everybody else, not so good. Stay tuned, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt live inside the Beltway on May 18th, year of our Lord 2022. Steve Kornacki, the man in khaki, joins us now. Steve and I had a falling out last year when he picked the Browns to get to the Super Bowl. He said their odds were good and jinxed them. So we're not going to talk about that today, Steve. We're just not going to talk about that. If you had to bet your house right now, who's going to be the Republican nominee for the Pennsylvania Senate seat?
Oh, boy, we go from Browns playoff odds to an even harder question. What I want to know, I don't mean to duck your question, but literally what we are trying to figure out this morning is how many mail-in ballots need to be counted. And my answer depends on when we can get that question answered. Because McCormick has been leading Mehmet Oz in the mail-in ballots by about 9 points. So there's the potential there, if there's enough of them, that he could overtake on that. But we're trying to nail down how many there are. And there's a pretty wide range here.
What's the minimum number of them that are out there, do you think?
So what we think is, in terms of yesterday morning, we got a count from the state in terms of returned Republican mail-in ballots. And as of right now, there are about 20,000 fewer of those counted than there were returned as of yesterday. So I think it's reasonable that there's about 20,000 of those. Now, the other thing on top of that is how many people returned their mail ballots yesterday. That wouldn't have been counted in these numbers I'm giving you. And how many people put them in the mail yesterday. Again, that wouldn't be counted. So the number could grow, based on that. So that's the biggest sort of outstanding piece of this, I think. And the other thing that we're literally doing, and we're trying to call counties, they're not all answering their phones at this hour. So when we can't get them on the phone, we are scouring their websites. Some counties report out individual precincts, and we're identifying precincts around the state that have not put out all of their election day vote, and we have found some of those. In Delaware County, we found 10 precincts where they've not reported out.
Those are good for McCormick, aren't they?
McCormick was leading the same day slightly in Delaware, yes, so they could be. And the other one that could be positive for him, it looks like there's about 30 precincts in Allegheny County, around Pittsburgh, where, at least according to their website, there are still outstanding same-day votes.
That's his hometown. That's Bloomberg.
Right.
What about Oz? A lot of people like Oz who listen to the show too. They give them some hope.
Well, he's ahead.
He's 2,600 votes. Do you have 2,600 as the number?
He's ahead. Yeah, we're right about there right now. And there's potential that in some of these other counties where he's been doing well, in particular right around Philadelphia, there may still be some votes. There certainly will be, I think, some mail votes to come. For instance, like in Bucks County, he's winning Bucks County. I think he could make some additional gains there. I think one of the biggest wild cards in this right now is Lancaster County. They had some issues procedural issues in terms of the mail-in vote there. I think there's at least 5,000 votes in Lancaster County that'll be mail-in votes. And I'm not sure who that's going to favor.
Yeah, send lawyers guns and money. When I saw that story on Lancaster County that the private vendor supplied votes were screwed up, so they had to give people revotes, and so they're all going to be people are going to have state officials are going to transfer votes from votes. I thought, this is going to be lovely if it's a one-vote election. This thing could be Florida 2000.
Well, that's the other potential on this right now. However this shakes out, if you're inside of 0.5% on the margin, there's a statewide recount trigger, and it's hard to look at this. I'm seeing 0.18% right now, separating Oz from McCormick in the statewide count. It seems very plausible this thing lands inside recount territory.
I agree. Now, so again, if you had to bet your house, Steve, you got to bet your ability to be on with the board during Super Bowl. Which way are you going?
If there's the number of mail-in ballots that I think, or at least that our spreadsheet is telling us there is, I think there's an advantage for McCormick. But I'm not confident that's the number of mail ballots. That's what we're trying to nail down.
So Jeff Rowe is out there on Twitter saying, we've got this. Now, Jeff is the best working Republican. He did Youngkin. I think he's doing Cruz. He's generally on the winning side. He takes some flyers once in a while. But everyone says that, right? Or do you risk something if you're a consultant, you say, we got this, and you don't get it?
I think you want to sound confident at this point, but I think truthfully, there's a lot of question marks because it's the counties themselves who are sitting on this information, and the counties themselves aren't fully, at 7:12 in the morning here on the East Coast. If you try to call Delaware County right now, which I think is one of the big question marks, I can't get an election official on the phone at 7:12 a.m. I'm not faulting them for that. I understand it's 7 in the morning. But they've got some of the most important answers here, and until you hear from them, I'll take their word on what's left over either campaign. I know each campaign is going to paint a rosy picture right here. I know what the McCormick folks are saying, though, because we've seen it. We can, the mail votes that have been counted so far, and we're talking tens of thousands of them. McCormick's been doing better than Oz. So
now I've got the earliest call for November for you, Steve. You can take this to the. Josh Shapiro has won the Pennsylvania State House stays blue in November. What do you think of I'm not going out on much of a limb there, am I?
You're projecting he's going to beat Mastriano.
Yeah, like by 25 points.
I mean, look, yeah, if you look at where Mastriano is poised to struggle, it lines up with the places where Trump struggled in 2020 in Pennsylvania, and that's specifically the suburbs right outside of Philadelphia. And that's where Trump lost the most significant ground between 2016 and 2020. It's almost the single reason Trump lost Pennsylvania in 2020 after winning it in 2016. And I think that the types of voters there that were turned off by Trump in 2020, it's hard to see them rallying around Mastriano. It seems like a lot of the things they rejected about Trump, they might find in Mastriano as well. The interesting question is, we live in this era, Hugh. I mean, I think you know this as well as anybody. We live in this era where split-ticket voting
I was just about to ask you.
Rare.
I was going to ask you if Mastriano's radioactivity, and he is kind of a radioactive candidate, will hurt a McCormick, who's a mainstream Republican with some Trump crossover, Bronze Star recipient, military, Pittsburgh born and raised. Can he avoid the down ticket? Can he separate? What do you think are the odds of separating from Mastriano? I don't think they're going to be campaigning together.
That's right. I'm really curious to see how they handle each other in public. I'm really curious to see how they handle, if Trump himself wants to make Pennsylvania, a priority in the fall, especially with Mastriano, getting the nomination. How do the two candidates handle that? And is it a case of Mastriano being rejected and a little bit of that rubbing off on the Senate candidate? I think if you're a Republican, your optimistic read would be that the national climate, which looks so unfavorable for Democrats, kind of trumps, so to speak, everything, lifts you in the federal races, and actually rubs off a little bit on Mastriano in the gubernatorial race. But I think if you're a Republican in Pennsylvania, whether this is Oz or whether this is McCormick who emerges from this, I think you're looking at a situation realistically where you're trying to get a split ticket result, and they're not unheard of. We saw it in Maine in 2020, but they're increasingly rare.
What else do you see, Steve? Just stepping back, the big board last night. What are Steve Kornacki's big takeaways from last night? 5 primaries is 5 primaries. That's a good data set.
Yeah. Look, the Trump endorsement, I think we continue to say does it win elections? Does it lose elections? Does it do everything? Does it do nothing? It does something. I'm looking at some of the counties that were Donald Trump's strongest counties in 2016 when he ran in the Pennsylvania primary, and he won Pennsylvania in a runaway. But if you look at some of the places where he did the best in that, they are correlating with some strength for Oz. So I do think he made a difference here just in terms of if Oz wins this thing, I think you could make an argument that Trump gave him a few critical extra points to put him over the top. And if he falls short, I think it would have been more lopsided, without Trump. Trump will say he got the governor's race in Pennsylvania, but I think that thing was pretty much settled before Trump stepped in. And in North Carolina, you saw that interesting scenario, Trump and the Club for Growth actually on the same page. And when they're on the same page, they got a blowout win.
So he is worth something. Steve Kornacki, keep coming back, but never mention the Browns again, ever. Steve Kornacki. It's Kornacki. You can follow him on Twitter at Steve Kornacki. The man in khakis knows the most about. Morning, Glory, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, live inside the Beltway on this Wednesday, March the 18th, year of our Lord 2022. I am talking with Matt Continetti. He is the author of The Right, the brand new book that is out there selling steadily and very well as people pick up The Right, read The Right, and then compliment Matt Continetti for it. Good morning, Matt. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. I'm well. Thanks for having me.
I wanted to cover 2 things with you. One, I've got a column over at the Washington Post that looks at Republicans interested in 2024. I'm going to come back to that. But based on last night's election results, we got a dead heat in Pennsylvania. We won't know for a day who wins. Madison Cawthorn is out. Ted Budd is in, et cetera, et cetera. What is the state of the right judging by last night's results?
Well, I think broadly the right is still motivated by a lot of populist energy. It's still broadly supportive of President Trump and his agenda. The Trump endorsement matters, but it might not matter all that much. And I also think we can say that the right is definitely energized about the coming midterm election and has a real advantage and enthusiasm.
Now, I just had on Steve Kornacki, and I told him I'm going to make a call, the earliest call for November, and that is that Josh Shapiro wins the governorship in Pennsylvania, because Mastriano is just too far out there. Do you agree with me on that, Matt?
Well, Mastriano is definitely what you might call ultra MAGA, right? Or what Biden might call ultra MAGA.
You betcha.
He is more MAGA than Trump. Trump came in with the late endorsement of Mastriano, I think mainly to burnish Trump's endorsement record because Mastriano had a double-digit lead when Trump endorsed in the final week. Here's the problem, for the Democrats, is that they thought Donald Trump was unelectable too, Hugh. And because of the environment in 2016, because of missteps by their candidate Hillary Clinton, Trump became the president of the United States. So I want to leave it out of the realm of possibility that Mastriano wins. So he definitely starts off, I think, at a disadvantage because of his reputation, and also because the Republican Party is very divided over his candidacy, and many Republicans in Pennsylvania are unenthused by him, to say the least.
Yeah, there are a lot of people divided over the 2020 election as well. I am one who thought the election was over the day after. There are people I know, and Salem Media helped produce the movie 2000 Mules, and Dinesh's movie has done very, very well, and they believe that there was a lot of cheating. I don't, but the point is that it divides the party. How much should the Republican Party and the right generally be looking forward as opposed to backwards, Matt Continetti?
Well, I'm a big believer, Hugh, that politics is about the future, not the past. Now, I'm a conservative, so I love the past. I think we can draw lessons from the past. I want to preserve a lot of the past. But politics is about what you're going to do for voters tomorrow, not what happened yesterday. I do think it's important that the Republican candidates focus on kitchen table issues in 2022. And they're serious issues. I mean, we see from the voters that inflation is their number one concern. They want to have feel empathy from their candidates. They want to hear solutions, potential solutions from candidates on the matter of inflation. Things like crime, things like the border, all of these are major factors in people's decision-making. Everyday Americans who are getting up and going to work and not thinking all that much about politics, certainly not thinking all that much about what happened in 2020. I do think a forward-leaning agenda is the way for Republicans to win this year.
Now, Matt, I don't know if you were on the air on Sunday. I got a day to absorb the Buffalo atrocity before I had to comment on it. In between there occurred the Orange County atrocity. And so I'm able to talk. I've been on the air live when shootings have occurred, and I was on the air live with 9/11. It's always hard to speak into that. But yesterday, Chuck Schumer blamed Fox News for it. I always think the Democrats go a bridge too far. I always think it's mental illness combined. And this kid's a racist. He's obviously fell into the rabbit hole of replacement theory and other weird nonsense that comes out of white supremacism that needs to be denounced. But what do you say when the gun control advocates arrive, and New York has a red flag law that did not work? I like red flag laws. They're called stop orders in Arizona, severe threat order of protection. I like those. It didn't work. It's on the books. What more can we do?
I also support red flag laws, Hugh, and I think this is a clear case of the system failing. The system's failing at every level. You know, the shooter was referred to a mental health evaluation, which he confesses in one of his journal entries he manipulated in order to get a pass. So people weren't paying attention at the school. They weren't paying attention at the medical level. I also am very curious about the family situation. He was there in the house during the pandemic. That's where he says he began his radicalization. What were the parents doing? So this is a systemic failure. And I do think that we have to be aware that this subculture exists online, and people have to be very wary of it and prepared to direct kids away from it. But you also need to have a situation where people in positions of authority are aware of these sorts of threats as they emerge and do what they can to stop them. And in the case of New York, where you did have a red flag law, I think more needed to be done to prevent this young man from obtaining these awful weapons.
And I am not going to blame Tucker Carlson or anybody else like Chuck Schumer did yesterday when you have a law on the books to prevent this sort of thing and it doesn't happen. I want to go to the other side of the country, Orange County, 5 miles from my old home. A Presbyterian church gets shot up, 5 people in serious injury. I don't know if any died overnight, 1 dead, by a Chinese Communist Party fan who drove over from Las Vegas, had explosives with him. He's 60 years old. He doesn't fit anything. And so as an inconvenient or non-categorizable story, it vanishes. Does the media have a problem dealing with gun violence that doesn't fit the narrative?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about just in the last month or so with the subway shooter in New York City. Clearly a shooter also motivated by racist hatred. This directed toward white Americans. We don't really hear about him. I didn't hear any blame being placed on media outlets after that shooting. And then we have the shooting here in Orange County that you talk about. This Chinese American motivated by anti-Taiwan animus. That too doesn't fit the narrative. I mean, look, the shooter wrote a rambling manifesto in the Buffalo case. His thoughts are on record. He doesn't mention Tucker Carlson.
Right.
He doesn't mention Fox News. So to me, it's just irresponsible for Democrats to go there in the case of Buffalo, and clearly opportunistic. And also, interestingly, Hugh, they're not actually talking all that much about gun control, which is, I think, revealing, not only because, one, it's New York. They have heavily regulated firearms sales and possession rules in New York, but two, it's also an election year, and the gun issue, the Second Amendment issue, does motivate Republicans rather than Democrats.
Now, I want to turn to the Washington Post column I have up this morning over at the landing page. Trump hovers, but the numbers of his likely rival grows. I divide would-be 2024 people into three bags: ultra MAGA, MAGA light, and everybody else. And a few candidates like Ron DeSantis, Tom Cotton, Mike Pompeo, Rick Scott, Tim Scott, Ted Cruz. They can do all three of those groups. What do you think about my general categories? Ultra MAGA, MAGA light. Those are people like Youngkin and Nikki Haley, and everybody else. Christie, who's coming up next hour, and Mike Pence, and people like that. Fair enough taxonomy?
No, I think it's a useful taxonomy. I kind of look at the race as divided into two candidates or two groups. One is Trump, and then everybody else.
Yes, that's true.
And so much rides on what President Trump decides to do in 2024. I think he's leaning toward running at the moment, but that could change. This is President Trump. He likes to change his mind, improvise. But I think it's important for the other candidates you mentioned, Hugh, not to be deterred by the prospect of a Trump candidacy. If you really believe that this is your moment, that the call has arrived, and that you can offer the country a successful presidency, you should run, and you should be prepared to run against Donald Trump. And I do think that's the belief of several candidates who seem to be active in this emerging field. They're not going to be deterred by Trump. They're going to make it a race. Now, I will say also, though, Trump may benefit from a divided field, just as he did in 2016.
I don't think Ron DeSantis is going to be deterred because his window is open and he'll have been reelected. I don't think Mike Pence is going to be deterred. He has one shot and only one shot. I don't think Ted Cruz is going to be deterred. He came in second. Our party historically nominates that Republican who came in second in the next go-around. And I don't think Tom Cotton or Mike Pompeo are going to be deterred. I just don't think they're going to stop running for president, Matt. Do you? Do any of these people drop out? Maybe Nikki Haley doesn't go. I wonder if she really just says, I'm not going to run against Donald Trump. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Haley may be one who wants to leave some room for decision-making open, depending on what Trump does. Tim Scott might be another one. But the names you mentioned, certainly Pence, Pompeo, and it looks like Cotton, too, do seem to be moving toward candidacies despite what Trump does. And look, maybe in the end, the more people who seem to be active running for president despite Trump's decision may actually deter Trump. And he might say, I'd rather be the kingmaker behind the scenes, or not never behind the scenes, but, not in the race, like he's done in some of these primaries, rather than an active candidate who has to go through the rigmarole of a long and competitive primary campaign.
One of the big presidents of a think tank told me he would prefer to reign rather than try to rule again. Matt, how is The Right, your new book, doing? It's been a month and a half. The Right was, I inhaled it. My son is inhaling it. How's it doing?
I think it's doing very well, Hugh. I hope everyone runs out and buys a copy. But there's a lot of discussion about The Right, a lot of positive reviews, and I think that's because conservatives now are really interested in the history of their movement, but also its future. And there's also a lot of people who aren't necessarily conservative who want to learn more about American politics and the conservative movement and the Make America Great Again movement, and that's all in the book.
The right is selling well. I'm just curious. We got 30 seconds, Matt Continetti. In promoting the right, are you doing any live events, or is it all virtual and media appearances?
No, we've done some live events. In fact, we're going to have an event in D.C. next week in conjunction with the ISI and Yoram Hazony, the author of a new book on conservatism, and that'll be at the National Press Club. And anyone who's in the D.C. area might want to check that out.
Oh, absolutely. Are you two going to talk just to each other? You're going to have it moderated?
I actually think Kevin Roberts is going to be moderating from the
Excellent, president of the Heritage Foundation. That is a
good discussion.
I may have to show up for that unless I'm on baby watch. Matt Continetti, thank you, my friend. The Right is available at Amazon.com. It's available in bookstores everywhere, and you got to look up National Press Club Continetti. And I can't pronounce the other guy's name. I've got his book. I haven't read it yet. ReliefFactor.com is a great sponsor of the show. One of the rare days that I take two of them. Because, as you know, I took a face plant on Saturday morning, and I am paying the price. Nothing broken, but I have got to take a lot of anti-inflammatories. The natural anti-inflammatories are all contained in the 4-pill pack. You hear that? I took, actually, with Trader Joe's sparkling water because I didn't have any coffee. Icarian and curcumin, resveratrol, and omega, together, they bring out the best in your natural anti-inflammatory reaction. I can't take NSAIDs. You're not supposed to take NSAIDs with a lump the size that I've got anyway because they're a clotting potential. And I think that year ran out in the last couple of weeks. Brian, was that correction predictable? And I haven't sold a share. I never sell during a correction. What do you think?
I don't, Hugh, I don't know if, I'm not a trader. I don't know how to be a trader. I have to be.
You and me both. Yep.
I want to be, honest about that. And I have to tell you, I don't know many good traders. I mean, people have all these systems that they've claimed to invented, and no one's worth more than Warren Buffett and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, and they didn't get to that wealth by trading. They got there by investing. So,
in fact, when I saw Warren Buffett bought like everything that moved over the last month, he's no dummy.
No, he's not. Now, I will tell you, I do believe that the next few years we're gonna pay a price. We did unprecedented things. Locking down the economy is, please let it go down in history as one of the dumbest policy responses that mankind could ever do. The second worst is printing $4 trillion new dollars, and the third one is borrowing $5 trillion from our kids.
Yeah. Panic is never a good look, right? Panic is never a good idea, and we panicked.
We totally panicked about so many things, but economically, we will pay a price. I do not think that price is this year. I think the economy will continue to grow this year. I think profits will be up. I think interest rates are going to go up, but maybe not as much as people think. And then in 23 and 24, I think the rubber meets the road, if that's the right way to say it, because the Fed has to stop this inflation. And I don't think Jerome Powell knows how far he has to go. And that probably is to causing a recession. And when you have a recession, that's when the stock market gets hit.
Now I got to ask you about bonds, Brian.
After that, you hang on, and within the next 5 years, you're just fine. So we need to think of it as investing, not trading.
No, and that leads me to the bond question. I've never bought bonds. I've never understood them, and I just don't know when they're reliable or not. When do people buy bonds? What kind of an economy do you buy bonds for?
Yeah, people have always bought bonds because they deemed them less volatile. So, boy, if you go back over, most of the late 1800s, we had railroad bonds, and in the early 1900s, and you could earn 3 to 4% above inflation. We basically had no inflation for a long time, and so 3 to 4% return compounded over decades and decades really works. And also back then, remember, we had all these railroads, most of which failed, all these car companies after that, most of which failed, and so it was hard to pick stocks. We didn't have index funds. We didn't have things like that. So bonds were a good, solid alternative. Then you got to the 1970s, and anybody who owned bonds got burned because interest rates went up, the value of the bond went down, and if you were holding a 4% bond and interest rates went to 14%, you lost heavily.
Yep.
But then in the early 1980s, you could buy a bond at 14% and hold it for 20 years, and that worked out magically. So again, this is more the way to have done bonds over the last few years is not blindly be in them, but time them. Be out in the 70s, be in the 80s. And now these yields are so low, I don't think they fully reflect the inflation that we're going to have. So I would wait before touching a bond again.
That's why I love having Brian on. He does not tell you to trade. He always tells you to invest, but he gives you parameters within which to do so. Let's look out 20 years, Brian, because we got 1 minute, so it's easy to fit 20 years in. Are you an optimist about the American economy?
Yes. Just one simple thing today, it's what is going on in Ukraine with Putin, ugly, 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 ugly. But I look at the events with Finland and Sweden, and I personally believe, you and I have not talked about this before, Hugh, but China is less likely to invade Taiwan right now because of how much the world is against it. Build Back Better is dead. The tax hikes that came along with it are dead. Germany is moving toward natural gas, where the Green New Deal has taken it a uppercut on the chin. And November looks like it's going to be a wave or a tsunami. Not that Republicans fix everything, but we won't have tax cuts in 23 or 24 either.
Tax hikes, you mean. Brian Wesbury, always a pleasure. Follow him on Twitter at Wesbury. Follow him on CNBC. He's the smart go-to guy who actually knew Milton Friedman and listened. I'll be right back. Governor Chris. Morning, Glory, America. Bonjour. Hi, Canada. Here at Live Inside the Beltway, joined by former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, who is co-chair with Mike Pompeo of the Republican Redistricting Trust. That's what I want to focus on mostly. But first, your reaction to results last night, Governor Christie. Welcome. Always a pleasure to talk to you. What'd you think about the way things broke in 5 states last night?
Well, interesting. I think a real mixed bag as you look around the country, Hugh. I think the key race going into last night was and remains this morning the Pennsylvania Senate primary. And with I think the last I saw, there's about 2,500 votes separating Dr. Oz and Dave McCormick, with about 5% of the vote still to be counted. So I think that's a key race for control of the United States Senate. I think we have a real chance to win that seat, or keep that seat rather, in Pennsylvania. And so this is going to be an interesting result as we go down the line. I don't think I was very surprised by much of the rest of what happened in the results that came yesterday. I think you see, Republican incumbent governors continuing to do well who were challenged. Brad Little in Idaho had a real challenge from a Trump-backed candidate in his own lieutenant governor. He appeared to have won that primary, and now he'll be reelected as governor. So I think we continue to see a trend in that regard.
I have one takeaway, which is they had Kathy Barnett. The last 3 polls that came out had Kathy Barnett tied with Dr. Oz and Dave McCormick in the low 20s. They were all wrong, and they always are wrong. They always understate Republican vote totals for the people I like. It just drives me crazy. Governor, you and Mike Pompeo have done a magnificent job in the Redistricting Trust, and I just want to say kudos. I didn't think you had a prayer in New York. Tell people what happened there, and God bless you.
Well, thank you. In New York, there was really the most outrageous gerrymandering of a map of the entire cycle in New York in both their state Senate seats and their congressional seats. And we took the strategy of saying, if they were going to overreach like that, we were going to work in concert with Republicans in New York to challenge it in a New York court system that we knew was stacked against us, given that 6 of the 7 members of the New York Court of Appeals, which is their highest court, were Democrats and Democrat appointees. But as it turned out, this overreach by Kathy Hochul and Chuck Schumer and the gang in New York was so bad that even that court had to rule 4-3 that it was an illegal gerrymander. And now I think you're going to see, because of that win we had in New York, that across the country we will have won the redistricting battle, probably gaining 4 to 5 seats for Republicans, which means, we're in a tie right now with them going into the election based on their current 5-vote margin. So, it was a great win. I think Secretary Pompeo and I took a lot of heat, as you'll remember, Hugh, earlier on in redistricting, that we were losing redistricting. We felt very strongly that our strategy was right. And as it turns out, I'm gratified, and I know the Secretary is as well, that we've been vindicated.
Oh, you have been vindicated, and I hope you do it again in 10 years, and you'll be still young and spry, you two. Let's go to Florida for one more quick redistricting check before we talk about the presidential in 2024. Ron DeSantis put out a map. I'm not quite sure if it's the map or not the map, or if you're still battling down there. What's the status in Florida?
It is the map, but there is a battle going on in court. We've had one judge who has said the map is not constitutional in Florida. It's now going up to the appellate court. It is still the map that is in effect, Hugh, but that'll be a fight that will go all the way to the Florida Supreme Court. But we're convinced that in the end, what they're going to find is that Governor DeSantis followed the Constitution along with the legislature in Florida, and we believe that map will be upheld.
Well done everywhere. I mean, really well done everywhere. Let's talk about 2024. I wrote a column about it. I put you in the camp along with Mike Pence and Larry Hogan that hopes the party reverts to the norm. What'd you make of that assessment, Governor?
Look, Hugh, I think your assessment was an interesting one. I don't know whether we're talking about reverting to the norm. I think what we're saying is that what I think the Republican Party wants to get back to is winning. And the fact is that between 2018 and 2020, we lost the House, the Senate, and the White House, and we lost a number of governorships. And the only other time since 1860 that's happened was 1930 to 1932 under Herbert Hoover. Now, I'm sorry, that's not winning. And what we want to do is go back to winning again, Hugh. And I think if what I've been trying to argue across the country is that you can't govern unless you win, and we need to get back to being able to attract the votes that we lost in the 2018 to 2020 period.
So the obvious thing that matters the most with a large field, and I think there will be a large field whether or not the former president runs. Do you agree with me by the way, on that? A large field whether or not Donald Trump runs?
I do not. I think if Donald Trump runs, the field will be 2/3 smaller than it would be if he did run.
Oh, interesting. Who will be in if he runs?
It'll be interesting. I think you'll see the vice president, former Vice President Pence run no matter what. I think you probably see Secretary Pompeo run no matter what. I think you probably see Ted Cruz run no matter what. Beyond that, I think there are some other people, including myself, who would consider it. But I think you're looking at a 5 to 6 person race as opposed to a 15 to 20 person race.
All right. Now, either way, the rule set that comes out of the RNC is going to matter a lot. And I had a conversation with one of the people on my list this week that I said, pay attention to the rules that Dave Bossie and Ron McDaniel come up with, because those 12 debates will decide it all. Do you agree with me on that? I think those rule sets matter an enormous amount.
They matter a lot. They always do, because in the end, as you know, those debates are very, very important because they help to shape both people's opinions and the narrative, the media narrative that goes along with what happens in the race, and that affects fundraising, momentum, and all the rest. And so there's no doubt that those rules were very, very important, and that those debates should be done differently, in my view, than they were done in 2016. This should not be a situation where we decide, who gets on what stage based upon polling if we have a large field. I think it's much more important to do it more like the Democrats, quite frankly, did it in 20, which was when they had a large field, they had random draws for who would be on what night if there had to be 2 nights of debates. And I think that made them have more interest and less wasted resources. I can tell you, Hugh, there were any number of the candidates in 2016, myself included, who wound up spending money on Fox national advertising in, September and October of 2015 to make sure that we were well in the top 10 so we would be in the primary debate. That's a waste of resources and a waste of time. And I think what we need to do is make sure that the candidates who are there get a fair shot to be heard.
I agree. By the way, I also agree, no marginal candidates. I love Michelle Bachmann. She was nice. She shouldn't have been on the stage in 2012. George Pataki should not have been on the stage in 2016. We got to have some sort of vet that says, sorry, you prove us wrong if you show up if you get, I might use polling to let a marginal candidate on if you show us at 10% or more, but we're not going to let you go on there and learn how to sell Vegematics at the expense of time on a Republican stage.
I agree with you, Hugh, and I'd also say this. I think in 2016, the other thing that happened was that Carly Fiorina argued herself onto the stage.
Yes. Yes.
And I think that wound up in that second debate, as you'll recall, at the Reagan Library, to be, just counterproductive.
And also, the large stage meant that when you threw your grenade at Marco Rubio, you had to throw it from one end of the stage to the other. Now, you had good aim, but it's just too many people. And so I hope this time around. So do you have input into that? How are they doing that? I know David Bossie came up with a see you later Presidential Debate Commission decision, and Ron McDaniel okayed it, and I'm fine with that. But as to back-to-back nights and random drawings, I'm all for that. Conservatives asking questions, I'm all for that. But do you have visibility into that process?
We do through the RNC members, Hugh. And so in each one of the states, as you know, there are 3 voting members of the RNC, your state chairman and your 2 national committee people. And they're going to be the ones who ultimately are going to be voting on and deciding what the rules are going to be. So I think we're all going to be trying, who are interested, are going to be trying to have input and make sure as best we can that it's fair. But remember, the RNC membership is still dominated by folks who were nominated and elected by President Trump and his folks.
The president is got a sufficiently confident level that he's not going to ask for it to be rigged, I don't think. You agree with me on that?
No. Look, I don't think rigged would be too hard a word, and I think it's a word that we got to get away from. I think it's what we're more concerned about is to make sure that everybody has an opportunity.
There might be a home field advantage built in. I will say that. There might be a home field advantage. Governor Chris Christie, congratulations on the New York win. I can't tell people how important that is for the next 10 years in America. And Chris Christie and Mike Pompeo get to take a victory lap on that one. Thank you, Governor. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Mollie Hemingway is co-editor-in-chief of The Federalist, a must-read every day. She's also the journalism fellow at Hillsdale College and my guest this morning. Good morning, Mollie. How are you?
Great. It's great to be here with you.
Thank you for joining me. I had Chris Christie on earlier, and I want to follow up on a couple of things that he had to talk about. First, redistricting has not gone the way Democrats hoped it would because even New York's highest court said the plan they produced stunk, and they threw it out. Are you surprised by how well Republicans have done in the courts of New York?
Certainly surprised by how it's gone in New York, since the courts there are pretty biased against Republicans. I actually don't think Republicans did that great overall on redistricting. It was something that they were likely to have some losses, but they had a lot of decisions not go their way. It's a tough battle. You have to fight for it each time. And state courts, as you know, can be pretty partisan and work to preserve partisan power, and it's important because it's just one of the most important things for having free and fair elections and having the democratic aspects of our republic work is to have good districts that are fair and represent the people.
Illinois and California are big D wins. Florida and Ohio, if the map holds up in Ohio, and I think it is, are good R wins. All told, I think the Republicans, according to National Journal, have about a 2.5 to 3 seat pickup, and that's before the wave, Mollie. So I am happy. I'm confident.
And it's good to remember that Republicans had an unnaturally good redistricting the previous decade, and so there was going to be some correction for that anyway.
Now, Mollie, you're one of the fairest people I know on the center right, and I don't know what your opinions are about Republican National Committee debates, but I think Ronna McDaniel and David Bossie have done a good thing by blowing off the Presidential Debate Commission, but they will run between 12 and 15 debates themselves in the primaries. The rule set will matter a lot. What are your initial thoughts on what a fair set of rules look like for those debates? If we have a number of candidates, as I predict in the Washington Post, we're going to have a number of candidates.
I don't know. I actually think the most important thing is, as you know, finally standing strong against this ridiculous thing that we've had for decades, where you have moderators who are so partisan and openly biased that they don't even recognize their own bias, and they treat Republican candidates like second-class citizens. I'm fine with large numbers of candidates. I actually think that it's great. I think a lot of people didn't like it in 2015 and 2016, but it was a good way for that party, the Republican Party, to work through some issues it had to work through. You saw it in 2020 with Democrats, that by having a large number of candidates, they also could kind of have some open battles over the direction of the party, and you get it all cleaned up by the end of the primary season, and then you move on. So I don't have strong views at this point. It's a little hard to tell without knowing how many candidates you're going to have in play. But the most important thing is to keep left-wing propaganda media types away from Republican debates, and also away from the general election debates as well. It's not fair to treat Republican voters like second-class citizens, which is what we've seen in our debates for decades.
I am pretty certain that Reince Priebus began the transition to what you're talking about, and I think Ronna McDaniel will finish it, and that the networks will not control. They may broadcast, they may carry, but they may not control the content, that the RNC is going to pick the moderators, and the moderators will work it out. And I don't think we have any shortage of Matt Continettis and Mollie Hemingways and Guy Bensons and Mary Catherine Hams. And I could go on, Jason, I could go on and on about the number of people who would actually represent the electorate that is picking the nominee. Do you agree with me on that?
Well, and it's not even representing, it's raising issues that are of concern to those people.
Right.
And sometimes having a hostile moderator is a good way to get good answers. The problem is when the hostile moderator is only hostile against one side. So, you could even have an argument that you want to put right-leaning moderators against Democratic candidates or not. But, think about how it feels as a Republican to watch these debates. They're bringing up issues of interest to the left. They're asking gotcha questions framed in a way to help the left. And so conservative voters who are trying to figure out what's going on or which candidate to vote for, the questions they want asked are never asked. And that's the most important thing. These debates serve the people and should help us be able to pick the right candidate. We can't do that when the questions we care about are never asked.
And I think that's best accomplished, at least in the Republican primaries, by center-right commentators, not by so-called independent journalists of stature in the mainstream media. Second question,
and again,
go ahead.
They're not independent.
They're
left-wing. They show that every day, and that's one of the problems is we treat these people like they're moderate or moderators when they're not. They're political activists, and they've demonstrated that for a long time, but in recent years, it's gotten so much worse, it's untenable.
It is I go back to the CNN debate prep room where I got handed me a book that they quickly took away because I wasn't supposed to see it. I was the interloper that had Ted Cruz's Lies. That's what the book was titled, Ted Cruz's Lies. It kind of told you what they were about. They wanted to exploit what they thought were misstatements by the current Texas senator. Mollie, I also believe in randomized seating charts, so that if you've got 10 candidates, you can put them on a stage, but you randomize where they stand. You don't do it by height, and you don't do it by polling. Polling last night was wrong again. They had David McCormick at 21%. He's at 31%. They had him in third place in the last four polls. He's tied for first in a race that won't be decided for days, maybe weeks. They are never right. They are never right, Mollie.
It's particularly a problem with primaries. So
Yes.
Polling is wrong all the time. Primary polling is actually very difficult to do. It's difficult to get right. You're dealing with people who can kind of make last-minute, the voters themselves make last-minute changes in their decisions, and so you have a very good point there that it should not be set by polling. I don't know about completely randomized. You can have so many candidates that you don't want to just mix the more legitimate candidates with people who are just running for a particular one issue they want to focus on, or that don't have the support either financially or with the people. So there should be probably, I haven't thought about it enough, but there should be some constraints on.
I hope you think about it. My theory is you ought to have a group of wise people who actually know the party and say, I'm sorry, you're not viable. Prove us wrong. But Michelle Bachmann should not have been on the stage in 2012. And Alan Keyes certainly shouldn't have been on the stage with John McCain and George W. Bush in the year 2000. And I know Alan. I knew him. I've known him since 1974. It was absurd. But because we have this stupid ollie in free rule, and we don't have grown-ups in the room to say, sorry, you're not in, that allows for marginal candidates. They eat up time, space, and opportunity. Mollie, talk to me about the party. I wrote for the Washington Post today. We have Ultra MAGA, MAGA Light, and everybody else. What do you think of my three divisions?
Well, I do think that people sometimes make a mistake in building it all around, building all of what they're saying about what's happening in the party around Trump. The Republican Party has gone through a transformation in the last 5 to 6 years. I think most everyone actually recognizes the need to update policy positions. You look in Pennsylvania, it is really interesting. You have the Trump-endorsed candidate who a lot of conservatives did not find to be conservative enough. You have the ultra MAGA candidate of Kathy Barnett. Those two together, I think they're probably got a majority of the votes. You've got Dave McCormick, who represents more of the establishment. But I'm also not sure there's like a tremendously huge distinction between these three groups. It's more like streams of thought within the party that predominate or don't. I do worry that the party doesn't understand that the voters are ready to change how the Republican Party has done business. They're looking for much more to be done when the Republican Party takes power. They want to have a clear agenda about the things that concern them, whether it's about the control big tech has over our discourse or taking on China. They don't want to just have rhetoric. They want to have actual action.
Now, Mollie, you're not old enough. You wouldn't remember the 1984 There's a Bear in the Woods ad. It only aired once, but it got a lot of play as a legendary ad. Some people, there's a bear in the woods. Some people say it's not dangerous. I think the Republican Party is united around there's a dragon in the air. And I think that 2024 will be the one thing that everyone agrees about is that Joe Biden has hollowed out the military and we are not in a position to deter China. What do you think about that?
Well, I think these were some of the debates that we started seeing in the 2015 and 2016 debate stage on how the Republican Party takes on foreign policy. I think that division is actually very serious and significant right now. You had the early stage of the war in Ukraine leading to just massive popular support for involvement there as people start thinking through what it means to be involved in a long-term war there, including what that means about how well positioned we are to take on China. I think you will see much more vibrant debate going forward and less of this sort of just reflexive acceptance of whatever the generals on TV are saying needs to be done in Ukraine. But it does seem that many people you're seeing, again, in these different streams, everyone seems to recognize China is a threat. This is so different than what we thought as a party or as a nation in 2015 and 2016, but people finally seem to have awakened to the challenge there, the economic and national security challenges there. And so I do hope you'll see much better ideas and more specific ideas about how to take on China. Biden hasn't been a complete disaster on that in that he kept some of our tariffs and whatnot that are there, but he has just been asleep at the wheel for the threat there. And, we keep hearing like there's going to be some new big policy statement released for Biden versus, about how to take on China. And we're still waiting and waiting.
It's the weakest administration since Carter, and it may be weaker than Carter. Mollie, I want to close with what I think is the slam dunk issue. You and Carrie Severino wrote a book about it. Everyone has to pledge to be at least as good as Donald Trump on court appointments. Do you think that's a given? People have to know the issue. They have to bring in the Federalist Society. They have to bring in Kerry's Judicial Crisis Network. They have to agree to be led by the pros. Do you agree on that?
Well, I think, having written the book about how many Republican presidents had failed to achieve the conservative judicial project, it's important that people be clear. And I think one of the things Trump did that was so important, and 25% of his voters voted for him on this issue, was say precisely what the list was that he would nominate from, instead of saying, I'll nominate a justice like Thomas or like Alito. He gave actual names so people could look at that. I wish Democrats would do that as well, but it's definitely a game changer in the Republican Party, and it needs to be the same going forward.
Mollie Hemingway, always good to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. Always keep coming back. Mollie Hemingway is